what happens when we start to come into that kind of meditation is we open up the compassion networks in our brain and we strengthen them. And so when we do that, I love what you said about when you're putting on your bracelet. So if you take a moment, even if it's just a minute, to practice a kind of loving kindness or compassion or metta meditation, it strengthens those networks in your brain, and it will be easier when things are a little more intense to access the compassion network. Because you are such an empath, what's easiest, right? Your brain loves to do what's familiar. It's got lots of very deep grooves. So your go-to may be empathy, right? And so, you're not even thinking about it. It's not like you're saying, I want to empathize and suffer. You just go there because that's what's really highly developed in your brain. And so if you start to make little shifts throughout the day where you practice when you're not in the thick of it, you'll start to strengthen those neural networks.
Welcome to Heart Parents. Let's connect with our kids and learn together. I'm Carrie. I was a former teacher and speech therapist. I'm also a parent of 2 spirited, gifted, highly sensitive kids. I was quickly brought to my knees as a parent when I thought that I would see a rosy lens version of parenting just as they present on Instagram, but I quickly learned that's not real life. I will provide real-life experiences and transform them into moments for connections and change for you to use in your house. Hi there, conscious parents. Before we start today's episode, it's Carrie here, and I wanted to reach out to ask you guys for a quick favor. As a follower of our show, we would love for you to give us a 5-star rating and leave us a review. It can be just a few words, that's it, and it really goes a long way with us with the podcasting community on Apple or Spotify. So thanks so much for tuning in, and I'm so excited for you to hear today's message. Happy listening. Hi there, and welcome back to Heart Parents. I'm Carrie. I'm your friendly conscious mama here, and I have a wonderful guest with us today who I'm really excited to introduce you guys to. Her name is Rachel Posner. She's a yoga therapist and mindfulness coach that helps people reduce stress, build resilience, and thrive. That's a great word for mamas and fathers. Her work is informed by the intersection of mindfulness, neuroscience, and psychology, and her teachings integrate best practices for the mind, body, and brain. Rachel has been in the wellness field for 24 years and is driven by a deep desire to help people feel calm and connected. And Rachel, I am so glad to be chatting with you today. I feel like so many of the pieces that you're bringing to people and introducing to families is right up our alley.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I'm so excited to hear the difference between empathy and compassion. I have never thought about that. And as an empath and having all empaths in our house, children and parents, I love thinking about this piece. So I love what do you see as the difference between the two?
Well, okay, so there's sort of an emotional component, but I'm thinking about it more from a neurological component. So
Okay.
empathy is when we are feeling many times the suffering of others, not always suffering, but when we're actually feeling others. And our brains help us do that. We have mirror neurons. If you're telling me about how you're doing and you're suffering, if I see that in your face, my brain starts to mimic that. And this can be lovely, right? Because it helps us understand one another. It helps me meet you where I am, where you are. But if I hang out there for too long, I will also suffer. So empaths sometimes have a hard time finding a little space between the sufferer and themselves, right? So what happens is I start to feel the same feelings that you're feeling. And oftentimes, because that's upsetting, it can move me into dysregulation. I start to move into fight or flight or freeze. I feel uncomfortable. We're kind of now in the same boat. And that doesn't help you if you are the sufferer. Me suffering along with you doesn't help you. It may help you for a moment to feel understood and seen. But what I really want to do as the person who's holding that space for you is shift to a compassion network in my brain. So empathy can turn on the emotional network, which often leads us into fight, flight, or freeze. Whereas compassion keeps us in our prefrontal cortex. This is where we feel calm, we feel regulated, we can think clearly, we can still have emotions, but we don't feel overwhelmed by them. So the
Okay.
difference between empathy and compassion is the difference between feeling your suffering and simply having a deep desire to alleviate your suffering. So I do
Mm.
want to understand you, and I do want you to feel compassion and to feel seen, and I want to hold you with a lot of love. But if
Mhm.
I get too deep into your suffering, I'm not going to be able to help you. In fact, I might even make you suffer more, because two
Mm.
people who are dysregulated tend to reinforce dysregulation. One
Right.
person who is suffering, upset, dysregulated, sitting with a person who is calm, who's regulated, who's feeling compassion, it's easier for them to come out of that distress when there is, this is co-regulation. Our nervous systems are always kind of checking in with the other nervous systems in the room. And it
Mm.
helps to ground us and keep us regulated when we are around other people who are grounded and regulated. So
Yes.
sometimes when we are feeling really empathetic, we think that we are actually doing the person a favor because we're seeing them, understanding them, connecting with them, when in fact, we're neither doing ourselves or them a favor if we stay in that space for too long.
Mm. Okay. That makes a
Does that make
lot of
sense?
sense. Oh, totally. Yeah. Yeah. And I completely understand as a mom, I'm trying to feel empathy and I think I need to switch my mindset and I'm going to try switching into this feeling and this mindset.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You want to do just a short experiment as an example?
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay, so I mean, as a mom, you have many, many opportunities to see your children in distress. I have
Mhm.
two daughters, teenage daughters. I witness plenty of distress. But see if you can think for a moment, and your audience, of course, welcome to join us in this. Think for a moment about a time when one of your children was in distress and feel into your body, even just like a glimpse of what that felt like to witness that distress,
Mhm.
and notice if you can kind of feel a pull to right away really feel it. And it's not that hard with our kids, right? We can get
Yeah.
really drawn in.
Yeah.
And so just imagine in that moment when you're making maybe eye contact with them, maybe there's some physical contact, you're doing something to help them feel calmer. Imagine if in that same moment, you can give yourself a few deep breaths. You can feel yourself not just in their bodies and with them, but as separate beings. Feel yourself in your own body. Take a few nice long breaths with a long exhale. Feel that kind of calming quality of the exhale. And then just bring in a sensation of, I love you.
Mm.
I wish for you not to suffer. I wish this were a little easier. And it's sort of like you're kind of finding a sentence, a mantra, a wish for your
Mhm.
child that brings them out of the suffering instead of dropping yourself into the suffering. So I guess
Yeah.
I wonder, even in this brief moment, can you kind of feel that difference of what
Yes.
it would be like to interact with your child in that way?
Definitely. I could feel like almost like a burning in my heart and my throat
Mhm.
when I was picturing the time that happened earlier
Mhm.
today in our house.
Yeah.
And yeah, just thinking about that, those feelings that you were saying in those words. Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
And so you
helpful.
can find a sentence, you can call it a mantra, whatever you want to call it, something
Mm.
like, may you feel at peace, or may you feel
Yeah.
loved, or may you feel connected. And there's sort of a positive feeling that might help them move out of their distress. And even if it
Okay.
doesn't, it helps keep you out of their distress. And if you are out of their distress, you will do a better job of helping calm them down. So it's
Yes.
I'm not suggesting it's like a magic pill that if in your mind you say, I wish for you not to suffer. And
Right.
that can sound kind of prescribed. So
Yeah.
you have to find something that feels authentic. And there will always be something authentic that you wish for them to feel at least a little ease. Like we don't always
Hmm.
want to get our kids out of their feelings, but
Right.
we want them to feel a little bit more ease with them so their feelings don't feel so overwhelmed.
Yes. Yes. And I definitely am taking on a lot of that energy. And with my kiddos, it's not often like a sadness, it's often going to anger. And so I can just feel my skin start to boil. So I will try this out for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
And
yeah.
so in that situation, you might be just kind of holding this background feeling, whether you say it silently in your
Hmm.
head or just a background feeling of, um, I wish for you to feel a little calmer, or I
Yeah.
wish for this to not feel so intense for you. Like something that's
Hmm.
really happening
Yeah.
instead of tell me more about your anger.
Yes.
Not that there isn't a place for them to tell you more about their anger, but
Mhm.
if they're really in the height of that dysregulation, they're in fight or flight,
Yeah.
that's generally not the best place to really be able to articulate
Yeah.
what you're feeling, right? You're overwhelmed. Articulation can actually lead to even more frustration when we're asking our kids when they're super emotional, tell
Yes.
me how you're feeling, right? That's just
Yeah.
like somebody did that to me. I'd be like, oh, seriously?
Not right now.
I'm not
Yeah.
ready. So instead, really more of just, I'm with you.
Hmm.
I'm loving you. I'm with you. I'm here. Can be a lot more effective when they're overwhelmed than tell me what you're feeling.
Yes. Yes. That's really helpful. I love that. And I love practicing that ahead of time. I might think about it when I'm like putting on my bracelet in the morning or things like that, just having it there and ready to try in my mind
Yeah.
for the
And there
day.
are a million, so this practice in the Buddhist tradition is called metta
Oh,
or loving kindness.
mm,
And if you ever work with anything like Insight Timer, mindfulness apps, basically,
yeah.
lots and lots of loving kindness or metta or compassion, could be called any of those three things,
Mm,
meditation. And they're really just the repetition of a mantra or a wish.
mm,
And what happens when we start to come into that kind of meditation is we open up the compassion networks in our brain and we strengthen them. And so when we do that, I love what you said about when you're putting on your bracelet. So if you take
mhm.
a moment, even if it's just a minute, to practice a kind of loving kindness or compassion or metta meditation, it strengthens those networks in your brain, and it will be easier when things are a little more intense to access the compassion network. Because you are such an empath, what's
Mhm.
easiest, right? Your brain loves to do what's familiar. It's got lots of very deep grooves. So your go-to may be empathy, right? And
Yeah.
so, you're not even thinking about it. It's not like you're saying, I want to empathize and suffer. You just
Mhm.
go there because that's what's really highly developed in your brain. And so if you start to make little shifts throughout the day where you practice when you're not in the thick of it, you'll start to strengthen those neural networks. And it'll be
Right.
easier when things are overwhelming to stay in compassion versus to get stuck in empathy.
Yes, I love that. And we'll be right back after this message. Hi there, Changemaker moms and dads. It's Carrie here. I hope you're enjoying today's episode. If there's any pieces of this episode that resonate with you, we would love for you to share it with a friend. A little helping hand goes a long way. We appreciate you tuning in, and here's more. So, is that part of your cultivating calm that you talk about? Or is that something different? I love that piece.
Uh-huh. So how I think about it is sort of the pathways to nervous system regulation, which is just another way of saying staying grounded and relaxed, not feeling
Mm,
overwhelmed.
sure.
So when stressors come in, which they will all day long, we
Hmm.
can handle them, right? They become a challenge versus an overwhelm.
Hmm.
So the three pathways that I talk a lot about are calm, connection, and compassion. So calm is that pathway that tells us that we're safe because our brains are always looking for cues of threat. That's our brain developed to keep us safe. It's much more interested in safety than thriving and things like that. It just
Yeah.
wants us alive, basically. So if we can reinforce the fact that we are safe, it
Mm,
helps to keep us in regulation and we don't have to get so vigilant, always looking for what could go wrong.
right.
That's the calm part, staying safe, comfortable, calm.
Hmm.
We also stay in our parasympathetic nervous system or that relaxation response through connection. So when we feel that we're not alone, we're braver,
Mm,
we're more calm, we're grounded. So, however, we can look for cues of connection and feel connected in our lives, whether that's to other people, to ourselves, to nature, there's lots of ways to connect. but connection is another thing that keeps us grounded and in that relaxation response, and compassion. So if you think about compassion in terms of compassion versus judgment, and you think about the kind of tone you use with yourself throughout the day, when we use a tone of judgment, of criticism, we tend to move into that stress response. And when we use a tone of compassion, we tend to move into that relaxation response. So criticism comes in as a lack of safety. That's how our brain sort of interprets it. Right. So I think about those three pathways. How can I cultivate a sense of calm or safety, a sense of connection, and of compassion? And when I can do those more often, then I'm much more likely to see stressors as challenges versus as kind of overwhelms that flip me into that fight, flight, or freeze response.
It's really interesting because I feel like for my kids, if they're flipping their lid, as Dance Eagle often uses, if they're flipping their lid, they're seeking out one of those 3 C's. And so I love that. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And I mean, with kids, I love to say this to parents, a lot of that safety piece comes from our physiological experience. So if we are hungry, if we are thirsty, if we haven't had enough sleep, our brain interprets that as a lack of safety. We're not getting our basic needs met, which is why kids often flip their lids, and so do adults, by the way, when they are just not meeting some basic physiological needs. So I like to think about safety in that bigger way, that it's not really literal safety, right? Our brains perceive a lack of safety, not just when someone is going to try to physically hurt us emotionally or physically. It perceives a lack of safety in all kinds of ways, one of which is, I just need a drink of water. So when our kiddos are thirsty or tired or hungry, they're much more likely to flip their lid because internally there's a cue that they're not safe.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I love that. Yeah, it really feels so simple. I feel like when you're thinking about a child's version, because a lot of their emotions are not as complex as ours yet. So yeah, thinking about those pieces is helpful as I'm trying to calm them or soothe them. I love that.
Yeah. And also bring the sort of basic piece of that to ourselves. Like sometimes I like what you said. It's true that their emotions are not necessarily as complex, but our emotions are oftentimes a lot simpler than we think. Because when we start telling ourselves a story about how miserable a situation or a conflict is in our lives, if we are well fed and rested, we don't tell the same story, right? The kind of narrative that we have going on in the back of our mind tends to be a lot more negative when we are not meeting our basic needs, which includes rest. Like just having moments throughout the day to rest can have a huge impact on how quick we are to move into overwhelm. So in a way, we're really just big toddlers. We're not that different from our kids. We just cover it better.
Rest. I don't know what that word is. It's summertime. They're always home. No, I'm just kidding.
It's true. So like, how do we snag little bits of rest?
Right.
So that we can be more present and less overwhelmed, and so that our bodies do feel like they're safe and nourished.
Yes. My husband and I, we, on the weekends, we take turns having our own self-care time, and we give each other like an hour to 2 hour blocks, and we switch taking the kids. And lately I've felt so much pressure trying to find my self-care activity. I'm like, I get 2 hours. What am I going to do? And it's like, I have to make really good use of it. But this past weekend, I was like, whoa, 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 Carrie, just phase it out. Go sit on the bed and read a book because you're exhausted. You don't have the kids are home all summer. You don't need to go sand a piece of furniture this weekend.
No. You definitely don't need to sand furniture. I second. Yeah, I think that's such a good example because I think sometimes when we have so many messages about self-care, and it feels again like it has to be very complicated and meet all of the needs, and maybe we should journal more, and we have these like long lists of expectations for ourselves, but self-care can become self-improvement. And we don't need
Mhm.
to improve. We need to rest,
Yeah.
especially as parents, especially parents of younger children that require so much energy.
Mm.
So I just want to reinforce what you just said, that sometimes self-care is doing nothing and not checking off anything on your list, anything on your
Yeah.
to-do list. It could just be laying down, reading a book, taking a
Mhm.
nap,
Yes. And it
filing
doesn't
your fingernails, whatever.
it doesn't have to be a self-care book, right? It doesn't have to be a nonfiction learning about neurodiversity. That's often what I geek
No,
out on.
yeah, yeah, that's not
Yes,
self-care. I mean, that's
right.
that's education, it's nourishing, it's all kinds
Sure.
of things, but I would not put that in the bucket of just rest, just for the sake of rest.
Yes. Yes. We can just, yeah, have our moment. I love that. Thank you. Thank you for that piece, Rachel, because now I'm going to allow myself to do that. And then, so that goes along with mindfulness and the conscious parenting piece of how do we maintain that in our busy society? And I feel like self-care is our magic word right now, right? Everybody.
Self-care and mindfulness, it's like the buzz. And I think, again, both self care and mindfulness can get a little too complicated. Like when we hear mindfulness, does that mean that, oh, we have to add 20 minutes of meditation to our day in order to be practicing mindfulness? And while I'm all for that, if that fits in your day, I like to just start small and say, what could I actually do today? What if it was
Ah,
just 2 minutes at the top of the hour to sit before I go to the next email or the next meeting or the next activity with my kids? What if I
mhm.
just sit 2 minutes and breathe?
Yeah.
Or take 3 minutes to have a drink of water and stare at the wall? Like mindfulness is really just about noticing what's happening in the moment without judgment. And so
Mhm.
when we bring in these pauses throughout the day to notice what's happening, then we can make a choice, right? We
Mhm.
can say, oh, I see. I didn't realize, but I'm hungry, or I have to go to the bathroom, or I forgot that I had to make that one phone call. And then we can make a choice.
Yes. Yes.
But it takes the pause to actually notice what the right choice would be.
Yes. Yes. It's so helpful to think about it like that because it's so easy to overcomplicate it or think that we need to have 30 minutes of designated meditation time or whatever modality we choose to help ground ourselves or empty our brain that day.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have to overcomplicate it. So if you had, so I have a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old right now. If you had children my kids' ages, what would you tell moms in the thick of it with the younger ones? If you could look back and tell yourself or a mom with kids that age, what would you tell us?
Because I did have a 6 and a 9-year-old. My
Yeah,
girls are years
the the,
apart.
the 3 years.
And I mean, they're older now, they're teenagers. But the thing that I really wish I knew when they were little was I really wish I understood the co-regulation piece. I wish I understood that when they're stressed, if I get ungrounded, they're going to get more stressed. And so
Mhm.
often I would kind of allow their stress to stress me out. And then I wasn't as good at calming them down, and I felt yucky. So, I mean, I think sometimes, unfortunately, as parents, we have to do the thing that's good for us with this background of I'm kind of doing it because it's good for my kids. I
Yeah.
would like to just say it's enough to just do it and we deserve
Oop, sorry, I missed. Hang on for a second
a
here.
bit much. Just
Oh, we lost you for a second. Would you? I'm sorry. I think the internet. Would you be able to
oh,
repeat
okay.
that?
Yes, of course. Are we good now?
I
Do you
think you're
have
good. Yeah, it's back on.
okay, great, weird. I wish I understood the co-regulation piece better. I wish I understood
Mm,
that it's okay to keep myself grounded. Just as a human, I'm worth that.
yeah.
But also it's a bonus that it will help kids keep my kids grounded. So
Yes.
it's just really important. I think it's really important as parents to recognize that taking an extra minute when you go to the bathroom to breathe and avoid your children for a minute or two can go a really far way in calming you down. And then it will make your job as a parent a lot easier.
Yeah.
And it's not a magic pill. That's not always true. But if we're grounded, um, one, that can help them, but also we just don't get as stressed out by their stress. Like they're kids and their emotions shift moment to moment. And so the more we can kind of create a little bit of space and be maybe a little less empathetic in terms of feeling their feelings,
Mhm.
um, the more likely we are to stay grounded and not get so overwhelmed by their big feelings.
Yes, I love that. I think I'm learning that definitely. And I know a lot of moms that tune in and they're definitely working on that piece as well. So I think that's super helpful. Is there anything that you wish you would have maybe taught or said to your kids at this age that in the mindful piece for kids and the conscious development of kids or keeping them conscious as they get older and go into the teen years or grow into the young adult pieces or
Yeah.
times?
When my kids were 6 and 9, I taught mindfulness in their classrooms as a volunteer. And
Yeah.
you are never too young to understand the nervous system. So I wish
Mhm.
at 6 and 9, I mean, I wish at 20, I understood my nervous system.
Yes. Yes.
To understand what happens, that we get simple things like when you get super stressed out, all of a sudden you have more cortisol and adrenaline in your system. It's not your fault. Your brain's trying to keep you safe, and that can feel really uncomfortable and overwhelming.
Yeah.
And when you learn to take a deep breath and expand the belly as you breathe and take a long exhale, the simplicity of taking 10 breaths like that will
Mm.
help you release some of that adrenaline and cortisol and get a little more relaxed. So, being
Yes.
able to do that with our kids to teach them just the basics, like you don't have to have a lot of information at all to teach some basic nervous system regulation, and
Yeah.
then kids will feel like they have more agency when they understand what's happening in their bodies, when they understand that it's not their fault that they flipped their lid because they were super hungry and kind of figured it out too late in the game. Like just to give them a little, arm them with a little more information. I think you're just never too young for that. Certainly at 6 and 9, I was teaching those concepts in classrooms and seeing first graders, second graders, third
Mm.
graders really enjoying that information and enjoying the little 3-minute practices that we would do. If I ring a bell, how long can you listen to that bell? You know, little practices that
Mm.
help them feel the moment. And when they come into the moment, they're more present and they're more grounded.
Ah.
So, yeah, simple 2-minute mindfulness practices with our kids are
Mhm.
so fun and helpful and skills that they'll keep forever.
Yeah, did you develop that yourself or did you find that somewhere when you were studying?
Um, it depended on the situation. There were years
Okay.
I was kind of making stuff up, and then I
Sure.
remember there was one year where the school came into some mindfulness curriculum, and they asked me
Wow.
to use that, and so sort of
Yeah.
it depends on the year.
That's amazing. I love that. I love that the school allowed that piece to be taught too. I was talking to a gifted and talented coordinator recently and she had mentioned that she's trying to help some of the schools bridge that piece to allow some of the mindful development in school. So I love that your school allowed that. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. And there's a lot of mindfulness curriculum now for
Yeah.
all ages. But what I found so fascinating is that I was doing a mindfulness curriculum for, I think at the time, a first grader and a fourth grader, because I was in both of
Mhm.
my kids' classes.
Yeah.
And the curriculum was basically the same. Like maybe
Mm.
they talked about things slightly differently depending on the age. But honestly, what I was teaching first graders is the same thing I teach 50 and 60-year-olds. I might have
Yeah.
used slightly different language, but
Wow.
not hugely, honestly.
I love that. That's wonderful. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think you had mentioned, did you maybe have a freebie that you were going to share with us that may have gone along with this? I was trying to remember.
I do. I do. I have two things actually.
Okay.
One is just a short, I think it's a 6-minute practice to help regulate your nervous system. And it works with muscles in the face, because when the muscles in your face are tense, it sends a message that all is not well. Tension can translate into a lack of safety. So being able to relax the muscles in your face can help you, again, shift into that more relaxed, grounded space. So that's one of the practices. And the other is that I have a monthly membership for yoga and meditation, which we didn't talk a lot about today, but any amount of yoga and meditation you can do, these are really fantastic practices to calm the nervous system. And I have a free week if anyone wants to explore it.
That's great. And we can include that in the show notes as well. That's awesome. I wanted to ask you, do you have a superpower that you can tell us about?
Power. I think my superpower in my work for sure, and I guess not just in my work, in life, is meeting people where they are. Meaning that I really like to listen and take in information without throwing my story into the mix. And I think that's why I love yoga therapy, because it's really broad. I'm not trying to solve a particular problem in a prescriptive way. I'm just listening and sometimes offering tools, but more often creating a space for people to come up with their own kind of prescription, their own action plan. And I think I'm really good at that.
Love it. I have a random question. I was curious. I've been doing Pilates at home. Is yoga and does Pilates bring in the mindful pieces that yoga has?
So I think mindfulness is just all about, can you come to the present moment? Meaning, can you notice with all your senses what's happening? And can you do that without judgment?
Yep.
And sometimes we do yoga without mindfulness.
Sure.
Any
Yeah.
activity we do, we could spend the whole time replaying a conversation we had earlier and judging ourselves for it. That would not be a mindfulness practice. So I think while yoga is really presented as a mindfulness practice, because oftentimes it is taught in a very mindful way. Notice your breath, notice how you're feeling, feel a sense of compassion. So it happens to be a practice where there's a lot of mindfulness reinforced, but that doesn't mean we're necessarily doing that. So I say, yes, of course, yoga is a mindfulness practice, but it's really what we're bringing to it. So if I bring those concepts to Pilates, if I'm in a Pilates class and I'm really noticing the sensations in my body, and I'm not creating a story about how I'm not strong enough and blah, blah, then I'm in a mindfulness practice.
Yes. I have another question that's random as well. With meditation side, I wanted to ask you, as I go along and meet parents that I feel like maybe approach yoga and have the cycle in their mind and they say, "Oh, I don't like yoga." Like, "Well, have you ever tried like a guided meditation? Have you tried that at home?" And they're like, "I don't want anybody telling me about my thoughts." What do you usually say to people that are in that almost defensive side, I feel like, with meditation?
Yeah. Um, I usually say, is there anything you could imagine that might be helpful? So when people say yoga and meditation is not for me, oftentimes they have ideas about yoga and meditation versus personal experience. Or
Okay.
they entered into it with an expectation that it was supposed to be 10 minutes of not thinking. So that doesn't exist. There's no way I can sit here for 10 minutes and not think. Um, so, I mean, I have lots of answers to that, but sort of the
Sure.
first one is, what would be interesting to you? Do you like the idea of noticing your thoughts? Do you like the idea of relaxing one place in your body at a time? Because a guided meditation is never telling someone what to think. It
Mhm.
is noticing. Notice your feet. See if you can let go of a little tension in your feet, or notice the thoughts that are coming through. Is that where you
Okay.
want to hold your thoughts, or would you prefer to rest your thoughts somewhere else? Maybe your breath, maybe your sensations. So I think my answer to I don't like this practice is, can you imagine a practice where you ask yourself to pay attention to the present moment without judgment? And maybe just start there. Maybe you're starting with a mindful walk, or maybe you're starting with mindful eating. There's a lot of different ways to bring mindfulness into your life. It does not have to be yoga or meditation. So I would want to start where there's a little bit of comfort.
I love that. I think that's so wonderful. And I always try to slow everyone in my family down with some mindful eating in our house.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yes, have some
Hard.
moment of connection and mindful eating. So,
Mhm.
yeah, in a busy house, I guess. Well, where can our listeners find you, Rachel?
The best place to find me is rachelposner.com.
Okay, great. And I'll include that in the show notes as well. I really appreciate your time. And it was so lovely to share all of these wonderful self care, mindfulness, all of these pieces with people. I enjoyed it. Thank you so much for your help.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, that's a wrap. Thanks so much for tuning in, Changemakers. This is Carrie, and I just wanted to send one more reminder. If you haven't done a review for us, 5 stars and a little few words about what you've enjoyed in our podcast episodes, we would really appreciate it. One other thing, if you guys would like to ever message me, I would love any questions you have or any feedback at info@hearttoheartlife.com. We also have a brand new website, which we're super excited to share. It's hearttoheartlife.com. Thanks so much for tuning in and happy life, happy times, Changemaker families.